Ooh, here we go.
Rosé.
Catherine, Jack, want to fill that up as well? Rosé. Merci. To the top as well. Oh, I haven't had a very while.
I call on Anna Cosgrave to take the chair.
The last public business meeting was on 15th of March with Adrian Landry chair. Last week was our honorary members debate, the annual tradition where a load of middle-aged debaters come back and openly complain about everything that we're doing in every single sense, while not mentioning all the times that they nearly destroyed the society. It was lovely for Rory, who was finally among his kind. In fact, based on the debate, I'm not convinced that Rory isn't secretly an old his hat who the on-men disguise and sent back to the First this week, we're going from debaters that are pale, male and stale with dynamism of the Harness final, named after the first person to prove that women are just as bad at being all the time. The debate is on the struggle for repealing the 8th. I was at the marches a few weeks ago, which was a wonderfully bizarre experience in a lot of ways. The guy next to me flew into a massive rage because someone started chanting no uterus, no opinion, and he thought it was unfair that men's choices weren't being listened to. Lucia was also there, but clearly no one took the church in the end. Of course, the his being notorious Vince, civil disobedience in the motion, is probably not thanking the bus driver while wearing the repeal jumper. So I'm interested in seeing the debate tonight. There being no further business than to adjourn.
Are there any objections to me signing these true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? If there's none, I shall sign. I should now call upon the auditor to introduce the invited guests to the House.
Well, first of all, I'd like to introduce Anna Cosgrave. I'm very grateful for coming here this evening. She's the founder of the Repeal project, which I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, will be aware of the Repeal jumpers. Katrina is displaying for us there. Also, our judges this evening, on the far left, we have Darren O'Brien, who is the finalist of the Corporate IB. To the far left, we have Katrina Green, who is the quarterfinalist of the World University Grading Championships. On the far right, we have Julia, who is the semi-final judge at the Galway IB. To her right, we have Lauren Sains, who is the winner of the Utrecht Open. And Sherry, who just announced we have Sarah Jones, who has broken the judge multiple times at the European University Grading Championships and World University Grading Championships. Just on the format for this evening, then speeches will be 7 minutes in length. There'll be a bell at the first minute, at the 6th minute, and a double bell at the 7th minute. So the first and last minute of the speech are protected time, so no one can offer you any points of information. During the middle 5 minutes, someone on the other side of the debate can stand up and say something along the lines of point of information or on that point, and if the speaker accepts you, you can ask them a point of information, and please keep those for about 15 seconds or less. If the speaker rejects you, please don't ask another one for about 15 to 20 seconds. As this is a competitive debate, no one from the floor can offer any points of information, so please don't offer any points of information to speakers if you're in the audience. But if we do encourage you to participate, you can do so by, if you hear something that you like, you can say something along the lines of here. If you hear something that you dislike, you can say something along the lines of shame. Other than that, we have oratory returns here, which I'd encourage you all to fill out. There should be some on your seats, and there'll be details inside how to fill those out. And rate our speakers essentially. At the end of the year, we use these to give out prizes to the best speakers over the course of the year. So they are important speakers, and I'd encourage all of you to fill them out. And then the final thing I'll just say is that we'll be taking floor speeches at the end. These are short speeches, about 4 minutes, and then after that, the competitive debate has finished. So if you're interested in giving a floor speech, please write your name on the side of the debate that you'd like to speak on down on a piece of paper and hand that up to me before the debate is finished. I'm going to hand you back over to the chair now to start the debate.
So the question for the House tonight is that this House supports the use of all forms of civil disobedience in order to repeal the 8th. And I should now very gladly like to call upon Catherine Kelly to propose the motion to the House.
On our side of the House, we care about women who have had abortions and women who will have them. We care about women being able to discuss this choice openly and feel like they can discuss this openly. And we care about women being able to meaningfully band together to protest the system that oppresses them so that they can get change together, right? So firstly, I think I should set off by asking, what is civil disobedience? We characterise this as active professed refusal to obey certain laws, demands and commands of a government. We think that this looks perhaps like not paying certain taxes, like sitting in, like striking for repeal, right? We categorise this as always non-violent. It is not harmful, it is instead disruptive, right? It is something that is going to disrupt the actions of a government, but it is not something that directly harms any individuals, right? We think that at the point where the government has been unwilling to engage for years, where even liberal parties like the Social Democrats have been unwilling to take a stance, this is the only way that ordinary people are able to communicate with the government in a meaningful way that they understand. It is a way for ordinary people to band together, to show the volume of those who care, to show firstly that they think that this is important and that this is something people should be able to discuss, but secondly to create a mandate. The two things that I will be speaking about today is how that this calls on a government and creates a mandate, and secondly, how this goes a long way to erasing the stigma, right? Why is this legitimate? Between 1980 and 2015, 165,438 women or girls who accessed UK abortion services used Irish addresses. This, of course, is not representative because there were many who would have used UK addresses or not used their Irish addresses for some reason, or who would have gone to other countries, right? Women need abortions. Women are having abortions. Women are forced to take on the financial and social burden of travelling to the UK by a state that refuses to call a referendum for fear that this will alienate people, right? Despite the fact that 67% of Irish Times readers were in favour of repeal in a recent survey, right? We need to erase this stigma and we need to lobby against the government. How do we do that, right? So this calls on the current government in a way that they can't ignore, in that it disrupts several actions they can take. It disrupts the way that they tax people. It disrupts the way that the workforce works, in that women are unwilling to participate in that workforce for a specific length of time, right? It shows the impact of these women who care to the government directly in a way that just cannot be done in any other way, like writing articles or campaigning in any other fashion, right? It's a direct call on the government, right? Okay? So this calls on the current government, but what this also does is legitimises politicians taking a stance or running on a pro-choice platform, which we think means that like parties that might set up, like Social Democrats who set up a few years ago, who set up on a platform of all of their politicians supported repeal, right? But none of them were willing to take a solid party stance in favour of repealing the 8th. We think that this legitimises parties like that taking a stance and saying we will repeal the 8th because they see the volume of women in the streets. They see the volume of people who are participating in this civil disobedience. They see the statistics perhaps produced by the government. They see the direct effects this has had on their society. They understand the legitimacy of this, right? How does this erase the stigma, right? It creates this sense that public opinion is strong, right? Because at the point where you see like specific number of women who are willing to like not engage with this, at the, like their society, at the point where you see women are unwilling to pay their taxes, at the point where women are sitting in or tying themselves to polls, right? We see how important this is publicly. It creates an incentive for like newspapers to write about this, right? It gets it like publicly told. This means that like women who've had abortions feel more able to share their stories with their friend. friends, because they see things like people posting like about, strikes that have happened, posting about civil disobedience that has happened, because the Irish Times is incentivized to write about it, because of the direct way it is impacted on the government, right? We think that this means there is more public discussion of this. We think that this means women who might currently, where there is not as much discussion, feel like they can't discuss experiences that they've had where they might have gone to London and had an abortion, feel like they can share that story with their friends because their friends are discussing it and they see that actually perhaps more people are pro-choice than they would have realised, and this is something that they can then share with people. And we think that this has a huge impact on these people because it means that they are able to share something that maybe they felt ashamed about, that maybe they felt they couldn't say. We think that this means that they get more closure, right? At the point where they're able to share their experience and realise that they're not alone in that experience, because all of a sudden the discourse is about, right, repeal, because people have seen things like people striking in the streets, because people have seen things like women unwilling to pay taxes, because people have seen these acts of civil disobedience that newspapers are incentivized to write about in the way that they will never be incentivized to write about when people are just campaigning in ordinary ways. Yes?
Like, you talk about media being incentivized to write about these things. Do you not acknowledge the fact that in a conservative country, they are incentivized to write about these things in a way that, like, specifically when you have these campaigns, only aids the creation of an image of pro-repealers as, evil?
No, I think the newspapers are incentivized to appeal to the majority. And the point where they see a lot of women in the streets, at the point where they see a majority of women participating in things like strike for repeal, they are more likely to think that these are things that will gain traction. They are more likely to publish articles about women who have had abortions where those women are able to share those experiences, right? So we think that this means people are more able to share their stories with friends, lose that shame and gain closure. But we also think that this means that the Irish Times, at the point where there has been a strike and they have to write something about that, we think that they're more likely to print the stories of women who have had abortions, who have had experiences with this. We think that this means, actually, in direct opposition to what I imagine that they might say to you, that they are able to share their news with middle ground voters who might have felt unsure about abortion. Because at the point where you read about a woman who looks like you, or who maybe looks like someone who you know, and you realise that she had this horrible experience happen to her, and she had to go to London, and she had to have this abortion that she didn't necessarily want to have, but that she felt she had to have because of her personal circumstances, but was unable to have in her own country. We think that people are more able to humanise people who are pro-choice even, and are more likely to perhaps vote that way in the future. We think that this means that people in the middle ground actually get to engage with stories by, these people who've had abortions, because all of a sudden abortion is something that is amplified into the public eye. So we think that the comparative where you have no public or civil disobedience is that there is no mandate on governments, firstly, to the same extent, that there's a lessened sense of urgency, and thirdly, that you don't actually get to embrace this stigma in the same way, right? Whereas on our side, we think we call on the government, create the sense that this is important, legitimises politicians running on pro-choice platforms, and we think that this means that there's less stigma, because this is something that's in the public discourse, that people can talk about, that people can discuss their experiences with. Right? Even if we don't pass a referendum that we would hope to call on through this, we think at the point where there is less stigma, we think that this is worthwhile, right? Because we think we allow women to share their stories, we allow women to actually engage, right? We allow middle ground voters to engage with this, and we amplify the stories of women who have long been ignored within the conservative country we live in today. Thank you very much. Very proud.
Okay, so Catherine has gotten up here and talked a lot about urgency, and she's talked a lot about how we, get that referendum, how we make that mandate for the government to introduce this referendum. She said at the end that the benefits of this protest is greater than the harms of not passing that referendum. I do not think that's true. I think that when you do not pass the referendum, you lose so much of the motivation and the push that this entire campaign has. I think you lose all of that when you lose this referendum. There is no point in having this referendum if it is not going to pass first time round. Okay, so on the point of urgency, urgency does not convince people to, the urgency that you use to convince the government to hold this referendum does not convince people to vote in favour of that referendum. On the idea of discussing these things openly, that doesn't happen when people, as I'm going to go on to talk about later, are too afraid to ask the questions that are making them undecided about this. the idea of creating a mandate, like that mandate is created by visibility. I'll talk later about why we already get that visibility under the status quo and how there are better ways that we can get that. And that anything that visibility is going to be that is going to be achieved by visibility has already been achieved and can be achieved better by other methods of campaigning. And also the idea that like this it incentivizes the media to talk positively about the referendum and about the campaign because like things like Strike for Repeal involve a majority of women. That's just not true. The Irish Times coverage of that campaign, like of Strike for Repeal, was largely against it. It was talking about how the Irish Times just don't like strikes. Like it was talking about how it's not like it's not going to work, about how there was so much more to do, about that kind of thing. Like the idea that a majority of women are in favour of this or were involved in that campaign, like is a product of like the liberal bubble that I think we are all a part of. And like the whole idea of like women sharing their experiences, like that happens under the status quo in the media, right? I think that there are ways that we can make that happen better, but I think that there are better ways to do it than this. And like that's not engagement. Engagement involves both sides. It involves people who are undecided about this asking the questions that concern them so that we can convince them to vote in favour of this referendum. Yeah.
Do you not think that they can engage more with stories of people who've been directly affected by this at the point where the Irish Times actually has to write about this because a strike has happened or some other act of civil disobedience?
Okay, like I think that people get those stories at the moment anyway. I think that they are already quite publicised. Also, I don't think that just because you have these acts of civil disobedience that the Irish Times is necessarily like mandated to cover those stories more than they are now, because like all they are mandated to cover is the actual protest of civil disobedience, not like the human stories of people going for abortions. That's not civil disobedience, and I don't think that all of that mandate for them to cover this just comes from visibility, and you get that. Like you have that already. Like you get that from scandalous cases of people dying from pregnancies. Like you get that from people like Savita Hapalhaver. Like you get that visibility already, and I don't think that this is a good way to get more visibility. Okay, like two main points in this speech. First of all, the fact that this doesn't address the concerns of undecided, right? Let me point out that this is not a black and white issue to the majority of people in this of the population. Like this is not a black and white issue for the most important people in this debate. Those are undecided voters, and these methods are not going to convince them to vote in favour of such a referendum, right? And I think that civil disobedience is there to draw attention to an unjust law and to make people recognise that this is unjust. We think that this visibility has been happening for since the referendum was introduced by all of the problems that it has caused. We think that with solid campaigning, on the ground campaigning, we can make that visibility happen more and more. But we also think that any realization that the 8th Amendment is harmful to women, that is going to be achieved by pure visibility alone, as opposed to substantial arguments, has already happened. Anyone who is now not pro-choice, because everyone knows that this is a massive issue in society. It's just not true to say that that the media isn't covering it. Anyone who is not pro-choice at this stage is not going to be attracted by visibility alone. The reason that they are not pro-choice now is because they have questions and concerns that making them undecided. They have questions when does life begin? What is going to replace the 8th? None of these things are accounted for in things that act as civil disobedience, strike for repeal, not paying taxes. Right? The way you deal with those is you go door to door, you campaign, you make constructive arguments as you argue in favour of repealing the 8th. You argue against the concerns that those voters tell you that they have, and you argue and you counter the arguments of the pro-life movement. And also, note that the pro-life movement already have it very easy, answer, because they're on the status quo. They can play on the insecurity of uncertainty of the future. In order to convince, we have to convince them that change is better. We need to get people on our side. These tactics don't get anyone on side who are not on side already. A lot of undecideds, if a referendum was happening tomorrow, are going to be more likely to vote no, because there are so many uncertainties with the status quo. And the same thing happens if you don't address their concerns, because your campaign tactics are all civil disobedience, things that do not involve actively engaging with the concerns of voters and dealing with them. Second point, we feel that this actively alienates people from the campaign. First of all, because it basically divides society into two groups, those who are pro and anti-repeal. Because the most extreme and memorable protests are going to be become the focal of the movement. They are the ones that get the press coverage. They're the ones that people identify with. And like anyone who gets involved in those actions, like are automatically identified as like vehemently pro-choice, as like very extreme activists, and like like those are the people that are involved in doing this. Like anyone who is unsure is therefore so much less likely to get involved in those protests. Like, which first of all means that they get less exposure to people who are going to convince them to vote in favour of this referendum. But it also makes people less likely to be convinced because all of the pro-repealers get painted as massively extreme, and because these protests are extreme. So like, what do I mean by extreme then? Like the fact that the campaign tactics involve like inconveniencing and potentially harming people by breaking laws that are not directly related to the cause that they're trying to repeal. And like also because they don't appear to care about the concerns of undecided voters. And what does this do? This leads to the creation of an image of pro-repealers as evil people, especially when you already have a right-wing media like that's hostile to abortion and hostile to protest action. Like you have this image of pro-repealers as harassing pro-life TDs, and like what do you get then? It makes undecided voters less likely to ask the questions that are concerning them because they're afraid of being called anti-women and being harassed in the same way. And secondly, you're less likely to be convinced by people if they've already annoyed you with your actions. Like if you already like are starting to buy into this image of them as evil, which is an image that is a lot easier to create when like on the other side you have the pro-life movement who have the advantages first of all of the status quo, like second of all of images of cute babies, and third of all the fact that they haven't like for example falsely imprisoned like the Taoiseach in his car or something. We think that all those things are incredibly harmful. They alienate people from the campaign. So hard to oppose.
Civil disobedience is one of the greatest catalysts for change open to the people because it forces society to reassess its morality, to examine unjust laws, and to change them, especially when all other options have been exhausted. Sinead gets up here and says, but there are other ways. There are no other ways. We've tried them all. Literally no one is listening, right? The government has ignored the wants of the people, the promises that they made to have a referendum on repealing the 8th. I'm going to prove to you that the existence of the 8th Amendment, the way it treats women as a vessel, and most importantly, continues to ignore the suffering of women, something the government seems pretty okay with, means that people have no duty to follow the other laws set by the state and are just in whatever form of civil disobedience they take in order to repeal the 8th and what outcomes they will have. That's 2 points, civil disobedience being justified, and then the other one about outcomes. First of all, some rebuttal. The idea that media skews discourse, right? The media is always going to skew discourse in one way or the other. That is the nature of the media. That is not a reason to not do this, right? There's not a reason to just bow down and say nothing, right? But also, by doing this, you create a platform for discourse. You brute force it. You make them talk about you. The idea that they're only going to talk about like the civil disobedience aspect is not true because people sell, right? No one wants just blank figures. They want to know the stories. We think you're going to get some of those. No, thank you, right? Which talks about the majority of people and how they're not going to be behind this. Like, look, people aren't homogenous. They're willing to take that, right? We cannot prove that everyone wants everything that's the same all the time, right? We're talking about whether or not we support people who do want this and who are doing this. She says pure visibility and not like substantive arguments. It's unclear taking a stance as strong as striking or protesting or coming out is not a substantive argument, right? The things that you are willing to risk is argument within itself, which I'll get on later too in my other points. And the idea of alienation, right? Pro and anti-repeal or whatever. Like, I think it's fair to say that most people can acknowledge that you want to repeal the 8th for a variety of reasons. Not everyone wants like unlimited abortion for everyone all the time, right? But we think you probably get that when you like unite people, when you see people from all walks of life come out and do this, right? That's when you acknowledge that it's not just like massively like pro whatever who want to do it. First point, civil disobedience is justified. Living under a state is not enough of a reason to obey the law when that state time and time again has ignored the suffering of its people. In my lifetime, women were institutionalised in Ireland for getting pregnant when they were not married. They're forced to work in Magdalen laundries. Now the state ignores suffering women who are forced to leave its borders to access abortion. Fundamentally, I think it's important to point out here, this is about the suffering women and not necessarily about abortion, because the women who leave Ireland every single week to go and get abortion prove that it happens on either side of the house, right? It's about instead forcing those women to travel travel to risk like clotting on planes, giving them no aftercare, and that stuff, right? And that those who don't, people who like are seeking refugee status and can't leave or don't have means like to travel or whatever, face a 14-year jail sentence for taking medical abortion pills in Ireland if they can even access those, right? It prevents those carrying fetuses with fatal abnormalities from accessing abortion, and it has literally resulted in the deaths of women in Ireland, and women being held against their will until they have given birth. It's something that's analogous to torture, right? Both in the psychological and physical sense, to make a person feel they are trapped in their body due to circumstance, such as citizenship, economic status, or whatever, and have no say over their own life, right? Repealing the 8th is about the Irish government being complicit in the suffering of these women, right, and doing nothing to stop it. The law that doesn't care what these women go through, the pain is seen as nothing and continues to ignore the prolonged suffering of women. Therefore, that law is unjust and does not need to be followed. And given that the state is complicit, no laws need to be respected, and civil disobedience is justified, whatever happens, whatever the outcome. It's not just about the women who travel and are directly affected, right? Because the 8th filters into everyday life for everyone. Everyone has the fear of what happens, what if I get pregnant? What if my partner gets pregnant, right? Will this destroy my life? And that is something that everyone has to weigh up, in their life, and that weighs in every relationship. Like, people know women who have had to travel. They've read stories of women being physically restrained until they have given birth, right? This is how they are affected by it, right? They know the psychological and physical suffering the state allows, right? And any state who treats their citizens that way does not have a meaningful say over the laws that govern those citizens. And they have no right to force people to obey them, right? So for this reason, any civil disobedience is justified, regardless of the outcome, and should be supported. But what do we think the outcome of this is probably going to be, right? During the last election, every single party, bar Renua, and who cares about Renua, not me, promised they would hold a referendum. They know that it is wanted, however, they also know that there probably will be opposition to it, and no party wants to be responsible for its political mood that's seen as a poison chalice. So they have ignored the wishes of the people, and they need a push. They need to see that this isn't a request, but it's a demand, and in order to finally call that referendum. Yes?
Regardless of the justification of these protests, regardless of whether or not they cause the government to hold a referendum, what happens when that doesn't pass because all of the people are alienated and their concerns are not addressed by those protests?
I thought this was kind of a weird point, which is why I didn't address it in my rebuttal, right? In terms of you can never know that a referendum is going to pass, and we think the risk is worth taking, right? If anyone opposition get up and say, we have definite facts that if we hold a referendum, definitely will pass, I'd be like, fair play. No, there's always some amount of risk. I don't think they can claim it on their side that's the reason, right? Basically, the government need to see the huge voting bloc that they are catering towards, who will come out in support of repealing the 8th in order to want to take that risk by taking to the streets, by protesting, by striking, by generating media and news coverage. That is how you give this issue a voice, because it will not be passed on paper, right? The government needs that pressure to know how much this is needed. And when a group is unified, as happens when you take group action, right? When you see how many people are willing to come out in the street, it changes those around you. Because it's not just something that one person in your life is talking about and arguing with you against, right? It's an overwhelming torrent of people, and becomes much harder to dismiss as just one issue that one person cares about, right? So it brings stories to the forefront and humanises the issues due to the stuff about shared experiences that was already talked about, right? But it also makes people think about why it is so many people are willing to risk being arrested and losing their job, and you have to weigh that importance. Why it is they do this, right? And that, I think, sways the undecideds that Sinead is talking about, in terms of you actually get to talk about more people and hear their stories. When women in Iceland striked, they made the country come to a standstill, right? It made them realise the amount of work that women actually do and helping to bring more about equality in the workplace. That wouldn't have happened through discussion, because you need to get people to actually acknowledge the importance of the issue before it's being discussed, right? Civil disobedience has wide, reaching effects that bring about change, in opinion, far faster than obedience will, because you're trying to work within the system. When you do that, one, you're complicit in it, but two, you can be told that by virtue of being in that system and operating within it, you are consenting to it, and therefore you don't have a real voice, right? Dissent is the only way to challenge people's conception of morality and bring about change when you show them why issues can be so important. It's also the only way that you can meaningfully consent to the laws of society when you have the ability to disagree with them and change them. I think by doing this, you bring about more people into the discussion, you make it more likely they will vote yes in a referendum. Look, in the past, we have fought for women's suffrage, right? Now we need to fight to end women's suffering. We beg you to propose.
Thank you, Catherine, and now we call on Rena Morris to continue the case for the
Okay, so I'm going bring you 2 points. So, like, why the fact that this is like going to have to be passed through a referendum makes like civil disobedience like particularly an inappropriate means of like of protest, and why like public opinion is so important to this debate. Okay, so I'm going to start with some, rebuttal will be interwoven, but I'll just bring you a bit that doesn't fit into the rest of my speech. Okay, so Catherine Kelly tells us that, like, you know, when people see a majority of women coming out and bonding together for this, then that will be convincing. Okay, Irish women are more pro-life than Irish men. That is what, like, the polls have shown. And a majority of Irish people, like, aren't in favour of unlimited abortion. So, like, it won't be a big enough group to, like, kind of have this sort of sway. Yeah, it'll be a group who will be able to be, like, painted as a radical minority and smear the debate as a whole. So yeah, I entirely agree with the analysis that they bring us about, like, the importance of repeal. No, thank you. But I am going to show you why on our side of the house it is the best chance of actually repealing the 8th Amendment. Okay, so, yeah, so there, like, because of the system that we have, with like the 8th Amendment being enshrined in the Constitution, a referendum is the only way through which it can be repealed. So, like, Catherine Kelly and both the Catherines bring us a lot of stuff about, like, why this is a great way of pressuring the government. It is a great way of pressuring the government. Civil disobedience has brought about, like, loads of changes in legislation, and it's a great way of doing that. What it isn't a great way of doing that is convincing, like, a majority of people. It's good for pressuring the government, and it might pressure the government to, like, call a referendum quicker. No, thank you. I think there's enough pressure at this point, like, that a referendum is going to happen anyway. There's little point with that happening slightly faster if it's going to fail anyway. And yeah, so, like, we get told that, like, no, thank you. We get told that, like, the government don't really want to be seen to take a stand on this. They don't want to take a stand on a controversial issue, and that this will put pressure on them too. However, if a referendum fails to pass, they're going to use that to not, like, talk about this for, like, at least another decade, possibly another generation, because they're going to use this to say that, like, the referendum failed. No, thank you. Like, this was democracy. They're like, the people have spoken. We don't need to engage with this anymore. Like, we don't have to take a stance on this controversial issue. Okay, so, yeah. So, like, we get told by Catherine Kelly that the point of civil disobedience is to inconvenience people. So, like, this has a detrimental effect on public opinion. So I think we need to look at, like, where we are at the moment, because I think, like, the proposition slightly have kind of missed us. No, thank you. So, like, where we are at the moment, like, the repeal movement is in quite a good place. A majority of people are in favour of greater access to abortion. So, like, you know, the repeal side is winning. So I see little point in suddenly, like, in adopting measures of civil disobedience, because the problem is a majority are in favour of greater access to abortion. No, thank you. However, a majority are against unlimited access to abortion, and measures of, like, civil disobedience, like, the people who feel most passionate and who will kind of come out are probably the people. No, thank you, who are in favour of unrestricted access. They'll certainly be painted that way, regardless. Yeah, like, a majority of people, most people are in the middle of the pro-choice, pro-life split, and this is what is going to be crucial. Yeah.
Do you not think that we engage with those people at the middle ground, at the point at which we amplify this conversation, and they have to, like, engage with it because it's published in the Irish Times that a woman had an abortion and had this experience?
Well, no, because it doesn't publish that a woman had an abortion. Like, that happens anyway. Like, that isn't civil disobedience. What it publishes is, like, people are going out, not paying taxes, striking, doing all of these things that are harming you, and that's going to piss people off. So, yeah, it amplifies one side, and, like, alienates the middle voters. And, so, yeah, like they'll be like the pro-choice side will be painted as completely unreasonable. And the pro-life side will be able to use this massively to their advantage to kind of say, like, these people aren't willing to listen to you. They're just going out, they're striking, like, they're willing to go to kind of any means to pass this, and they don't care about your concerns. Like, they're out on the streets. Like, civil disobedience suggests that reservations about the pro-choice side, about, like, being pro-choice, is totally illegitimate. Like, Catherine Pasifka says that the pro-choice side, like civil disobedience is needed when like a law is kind of illegitimate. So like that is kind of what you were saying. And if you were telling people that like their stance, their reservations about abortion is illegitimate, they're not going to want to engage with you. You're not going to get these conversations like that you want to have. Like, yeah, there's not going to be a dialogue. You're just going to have like silent pro-life voters who feel like they are not listened to. So it's important to have like respectful debate and to treat like pro-life opinions as like a legitimate stance, because if you don't treat it as a legitimate stance, you can't win people over, because people aren't going to listen to you if you're just saying like, oh, you want to control people's bodies, we're not going to engage with you, we're going striking on the street because of you people who are trying to like oppress us. Like the motivation for like most pro-life people is not controlling people's bodies, it's protecting life. Like everybody has their stance because they believe that is like the best society. So so we need to treat everybody's positions as legitimate if we want to convince anybody. So for those reasons, I beg you to oppose.
Free edgy 5
Just to say, just remind everyone to do floor speeches.
It's too edgy. But okay, don't pull me down. That's your Facebook.
It's all good. It's fine. That's the only way you know. It's jealous.
That's so funny.
Yeah, that works.
Right. At the point where the church won't keep its fucking rosaries off my ovaries, and at the point, I don't care, at the point where refusing abortion rights is a criminal injustice to people with uteruses, we think that all forms of civil disobedience absolutely need to be observed to repeal the oath. So, the main points of clash so far have been, firstly, somehow that Opbench has turned this into an all civil disobedience versus no civil disobedience debate, which we think is a false dichotomy, which is also very funny, as Sinead claims it's not a black and white issue, and then tells us that instead of having all civil disobedience, it's great if we just have none. If no one ever raises their voice against the system, and sure, it'll be grand, we'll win the referendum that way. And then the second point of clash is that this idea of, oh, you're somehow harming a referendum passing by giving your opinion on why you think it should pass, and whether seeing women on that bridge will help you get that referendum. In my substantive, I will tell you why not only you will see those women, you will be on that bridge, speaking for them, speaking with anyone who has a uterus on why they should be given choice. No, thank you. So, we think Clash A has fallen out of the debate, mainly because, we think that OP have completely mischaracterized how civil disobedience gets attention. Yes, we're willing to concede that for, 60-year-old men, they're probably always going to see people as, oh, those women on a bridge, just annoying us, not giving us taxes. But we do think that, even if, as Sinead says, oh, we don't get the attention, we don't get good attention in, moderate mainstream media, we think that, even negative attention, so long as it gets to, the echo chambers of those 60-year-old men who actually have a vote, who actually say something of consequence, so long as, our voices, no thank you, can break through those echo chambers, even if it's not positively, no thank you, but by just saying,
repeal is happening, strike is happening, we have a voice and we're taking a stance, we think that we actually get attention in the exact spaces we need to get them, because we don't really think mainstream media has a great influence on people anymore. And we think that, like, what prevents, like, the actual mobilization... No, thank you. We think that what prevents actual mobilization of, like, lots of groups of people towards repeal isn't the fact that, it's not being broadcast in mainstream media. We think the actual thing that prevents mobilization is that, having to go for an abortion is not in the lived experience of someone without a uterus. We think that that's what it comes down to. And we think that so long as we can mobilize those people by any forms that are justifiable, so long as they're non-violent, we think that all forms of civil disobedience are absolutely justified. No, thank you. Okay, so, yeah. So, I think I've done mainly, like, Sinead's rebuttal about the RTE. I've done... Oh, yeah, also, yeah, we profoundly disagree with, like, the characterization we get from about, radicalism being, like, delegitimized by their side, because no, thank you. We think that our ability to reach out to as many people as possible, as many people as see us on the street, even if they don't think well of us, is far greater than, like, the demonization we get daily, the demonization we get on strike when men tell us we're going to murder these children, when they're, like, men of the church who probably, like, had links to them. No, thank you. We think that, like, our perspective being heard matters way more than our demonization, because it means that we have a voice even if they're trying to suppress us, right? And so we still think that, like, that is the kind of voice that gets through echo chambers. We're willing to concede that some of it is negative, but we still think that so long as we are heard in all spheres, we still make an impact. No, thank you. But now moving on to my substantive, why explicitly endorsing all civil disobedience is the only way to promote true intersectionality? Secondly, why that intersectionality makes it insidiously effective. And thirdly, why that effectiveness makes it incredibly indispensable for our cause. So firstly, why it's intersectional. Catherine says people are homogenous, but we don't really get, like, a greater, like, characterization apart from that. Like, we know that people aren't homogenous, but all civil disobedience is what gives, like, people with uteruses, cis men, trans women, a choice in how they want to have a voice. We take this cause out of the GMB and the company of well-educated, high-achieving women to the streets where people are pregnant but now live on cardboard beds. We take them to, like, queer women in the traveller community who are pressured into having, like, marriages with men even though they're queer, and they face them with the highest mental illness rates in the country. We give the Gonzaga-educated white cis man wearing a repeal jumper every day of the week as much power as the poor non-binary person of colour who can't afford food the same week but will still go on economic boycott on the day of strike just to make their voice heard. We give the crisis counsellors and Nightline and psychiatrists and gynecologists a deep personal reassurance from the pro-choice lobby in risking a prison term to make sure that women whose organs are failing aren't told Ireland is a Catholic state, so we will, like, not give you the right to abort your child. And, like, most importantly, you are giving someone, maybe, who has had to flee the state for an abortion, or whose choice of one was suppressed by the state, whose face will not be seen and whose voices won't be heard and whose steps out of the country won't be heard. You are giving those people a voice, the same voice that pro-lifers and their constitutionally backed billboard bigotry and, shiny baby faces on billboards will have. Yes, Sinead?
That visibility can be gotten without civil disobedience. Why is that more important than ensuring that in the long run, we actually repeal the Act?
Okay, so it's specifically important because a lot of people who don't have the privilege that you or I do as very educated women in Trinity who are relatively well off, it's giving those people a way to get their voice heard. Because, we can debate, we can go to the Citizens' Assembly with relative ease through, Trinity lobbying groups and, talk about our experiences or lack thereof. Women on the street can't do that. Women who, may have to pay for their life by selling their bodies for sex and then getting pregnant can't do that. And we think civil disobedience is the only way they can do that sometimes. And we think, therefore, all forms of it must be legitimized and supported by the lobby. So, finally, why it's therefore more effective. You reduce the stakes for access to activism. You show that each voice matters as much as the next in the pro-choice lobby. You become a lobby that invites and is seen to invite a multitude of perspectives, address their concerns, and move forward as a stronger movement. And you use these people from different walks of life to smash barriers of age and culture and religion, and to smash down the doors of every single conservative echo chamber where small minds fester poisonous policies to keep women down. And this is why the holistic effectiveness makes all civil disobedience indispensable. Because we aren't pro-choice just for cis white women to blaze ahead in political factions. But we are those voices too. We don't work for people with uteruses to just have bodily autonomy, but we are that too. Like, it is the only way we can reach out for and validate every citizen's help in this lobby in our country, and to, like, in a glorious cesspool of civil disobedience, to take this fucking amendment down. And therefore, we think you should propose. Thank you very much.
Excuse me, because you wrote the name down wrong, but
It's
very
cute.
impressive. Yeah, I want to thank you for your comments, and now we're going to call on Vicky to continue to raise the oppositions. Woo!
So when we think about civil disobedience, we think of Rosa Parks, we think of the suffragettes, we think of the civil rights movement, and we think of Gandhi's Salt March against colonialism. While these are all excellent examples of how public uprising against the state is a legitimate and necessary part of society, that's all they are. They're examples. It's easy to name the big events, the moments that made history. Rosa Parks' famous no when she was asked to leave her seat on the bus is one of the few moments of civil disobedience that we can cling to and say, see, it works. Black people would have never gotten the vote without her. However, the circumstances surrounding the discussion of tonight's debate are different than those of the historic moments. And so they must be approached in a different manner. Obviously, we're not, as, I can't remember who said it, but someone said that we were against all forms of civil disobedience. That's obviously not true. We're like cool with some, but all forms is what we're not okay with. We don't agree with like outright striking and all that kind of stuff. We don't agree with all the more advanced or the extreme stuff. No, thank you. So Catherine Brasiska told us that the point that most of us has brought today about the middle grounders and how they are the most important people in this debate are like the really weird point that she didn't want to talk about. But we feel that the only people who speak up in this kind of an argument are the people who are pro-choice and the people who are aggressively pro-life. The people who don't speak up are the people who are either pro-life or they're undecided, and they can be swayed either way if someone gives them the chance to talk about it and discuss it in the right way. So there have been times and places where civil disobedience has changed the world for the better. There's absolutely no doubt about that. Civil disobedience has ended wars, it's given women and people of colour the right to vote. What we're opposing is all forms. We're obviously okay with, obviously some. However, so I'm going to talk about this study that was done that was in the University of Toronto that recommends that a change in tactics is long overdue for the culture of activism, one that doesn't include civil disobedience, shouting, or actually getting angry at all. It studied the ability of certain types of activists to persuade people on their opinions and found that the more aggressive and angry the activists got, the less influential they were. And despite statistical proof that engaging in this type of aggressive and negative toned actions causes the general public to not only turn a deaf ear to them, actually promotes, it encourages them to go to the other side because they're seen as forcing ideas down their throat and they don't want that. So by aggressively promoting change and advocating unconventional practices, activists become associated with hostile militancy and unconventional, I can't pronounce that word, or eccentricity. People may be more receptive, to advocates who defy stereotypes by coming across as pleasant and approachable as possible, like in the Yes campaign. So I'm not saying that civil disobedience has never been effective or that it can never be effective, but today it is not only not helping, it's hurting us. What I find really funny is that the conclusions that was reached in this study mirrors those in How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. So Dale Carnegie makes the case that those with the most influence are those who show a sincere interest in looking at an issue from all sides, respects the opinions of others, promote solutions, and are genuinely good people. The Yes campaign 2 years back had discussed in an Irish Times article how they won the referendum. They said that they focused increasingly on the need to have a soft tone, the need to defend against a characterization as being bullying or threatening, the need to tap into the rich vein of personal stories. So the repeal movement don't do this. While I'm part of it, I know this for a fact. They shout and they yell, and yes, I was a part of it, but that I wanted to be part of it. Change is possible if we tone down the aggression, allow others to drop their defences and actually listen to people. Sorry, okay, so one criticism of this approach, which I'm sure a lot of people will have, would be considering the severity of some of the problems that we're facing. So abortion is a very big issue. People have the right to be angry, which they do. I'm only talking about how expressing your opinions through anger will reduce your influence over people. So while I was there on O'Connell Bridge, shouting catchy slogans at passers-by, at the police forces, at the news cameras, at all of my fellow Irish people, I don't fully believe that that is how we will get the result. I take part because I want it to work. I take part because I'm a woman, and I don't believe that two old white men, I've never met before, should be telling me what I can and can't do with my body. If it works, then it's great. I'll be so happy if it actually works. But the repeal campaign has gone down this path that it can't, that it needs to back out of, or else it will lose the referendum. So an Irish Times, no, thank you. Sorry, I took notes. So an Irish Times article was written talking about how the repeal movement has isolated itself so much from the average Irish voter that it could easily lose. Women and men alike who share the pro-life belief feel that they are better off keeping their pro-life thoughts to themselves because they feel that the pro-choicers are smothering them. They feel that they can't talk about their pro-life beliefs because they feel that the pro-choicers will be well, you're not a woman if you don't believe, if you don't believe in pro-choice. They feel that the society is toxic and damaging, and they won't be taking part in the strike. They won't be forcing the government to call a referendum, but they are there. And they are many. They are most of the population. As I've said before, the only people we hear about are the people who are pro-choice or the people who are aggressively pro-life. If the repeal movement don't stop ridiculing and dismissing pro-lifers as Bible bashers or whatever they want to call it, they may lose, and they will lose, a vast majority of the population. So Ireland is it's quite a liberal place. Employers, they can't discriminate based on gender or based on religion or whatever. But we are a Christian democracy, and up until very recently, the Catholic Church has sort of dictated our society, if you look at the Eighth Amendment and all that kind of stuff. So the population is typically broken into the younger conservatives, or the younger liberals and the older conservatives. It was easier to sway the older conservatives on the idea of same-sex marriage because it was about the rights of two people who loved each other, regardless of their gender. But while this is much harder, is because they truly believe that abortion is murder. They believe that you are killing a baby. While that's not actually true, that is what they believe, and that is how we need to discuss. That is what we need to engage with them on the topic of. So we need to sway them, we need to talk to them, we need to begin listening to their views and stop trying to force the beliefs on our people. So if we don't do this, we may actually experience a shock result similar to that of Trump, similar to that of Brexit. And so what we're trying to bring you is that it's not that civil disobedience is bad, it's that the middle grounders will see this as the type of anger that they don't associate with, and they will just they will just kind of retreat back to the other side. And that is why I beg you to oppose. Thank you.
Speeches are going to announce the store speakers after the speech, so if you are interested in giving a first speech, please do write your name down on this paper on the side of the debate you'd like to speak on and hand that up to me, please.
Okay, so I was going
going to start with a little story, but I'll get to that in a moment. First, I'm going to start with some rebuttal, and then I'll discuss about how what we've done already isn't working, and how this false dichotomy that we're hearing about isn't real, that it doesn't mean that we have to be civil disobedient and also not civil. Okay, so we heard a lot from Sinead about how the publicity that we'll gain from this will all be negative, you know, frickin' RT being all conservative and all. But here's the thing, we gained a lot of international publicity from this. We got buzz, and now I understand this is like a lot of media, online media, but for example, BuzzFeed spoke about it. Lots of different media outlets from different countries came and videoed what was happening in Ireland, even though it was happening on the exact same day that marches were happening across the world. This meant that this march was special because it had a special message. And here's the good thing, when we hear this, we then get international pressure. So we hear a lot about how, you know, our government isn't listening to us and they're not bringing this referendum about, even though they promised this. Well, here is pressure that they might actually succeed to. They might actually listen to what the EU is telling them. And I know that the EU has already condemned Irish laws, but the thing is, it's gone out of the limelight. We've forgotten about it. But civil disobedience will allow this to continue to live in the limelight. And so I don't believe that all publicity will be bad publicity. Now, back to my story. This has happened before, and really, really successfully, but not in America, not in Britain, but actually in Ireland. Because in 1970, women weren't allowed in some pubs go into a pub alone, or if they were, it would be with a man, and they would most definitely not be allowed to order a pint. I don't even know why, but that's the truth. And so what happened is Nell McCaffrey, along with 29 other women, went into a pub, ordered 30 rounds of brandy, then they asked for 1 pint. When the 1 pint came round, or they said, sorry, we're not paying, we're not giving you this, we can't do this. They'd finished their brandy and they said, well, we're not paying it. This is the type of civil disobedience that actually works. We already heard about how we have gender discrimination doesn't happen in Ireland. This is one of the founding reasons this isn't the case. This is why we passed the act that stopped gender discrimination. This was one of the first steps towards that, and this is what we also need. We need to fight towards that referendum. Now, we've also heard about how there will not be a debate, how pro-life people will feel like they're being pushed down, or even people on the edge. They don't actually hear enough about the other side. These pro-choice people are just screaming at them. But no, I actually think that civil disobedience, once it forces that there to be a referendum, that we can have a proper conversation. Once there is a campaign, once there are campaigns on either side, we will all be able to hear both sides of the conversation. I'll take that.
As I showed you, by the time that you get to that campaign, this image has already been created of the pro-repeal movement as being evil and the kinds of people that trap like pro-life TDs in their cars.
I think this is something that some people will push, and it's an image that will happen no matter what. It will happen even if we very, very calmly try to force this referendum to happen. Pro-choice people will still be called erratic and angry and crazy feminists, because these are names that have already been thrown upon pro-choice people. May I ask how much time I have left? Perfect. So this is something that's going to happen anyways, so we might as well make the most of it. We might as well use it if we're going and push this referendum about. So now I'm going to get on to another point of mine. Another thing I actually haven't heard much about is, so we've done all of these democratically great things, right? So we've all signed petitions, and we've all, called our TDs, and we've all bought these amazing repeal jumpers that have made a statement. But this isn't working. We've done all the necessary steps that have been non-protesting, that have not been civil disobedience. We've done all these things, but they're not working. We need to take a step further. Because here's the thing. Democracy is broken in Ireland. Our two main parties are both right-wing, whose only difference is that they hate each other. And in that way, are the same. Thank you. And these people who are in government and these TDs, no, unfortunately, the people who are most unlikely to vote for them are young people. And they know the people who are most likely to vote are old people who generally tend to be more pro-life. So when they're thinking about what stance they'll take, they'll wonder about, Who's going to vote for me in the next election? This is why they don't want to rock the boat. And there is, of course, this other element of the Catholic Church and also not wanting to be disrespectful and push against this. The Journal recently, or a year ago, called every single TD in the country and emailed them and tried to get in contact with them several times, asking them, are you pro-repeal the 8th? Over half didn't even respond. This is a topic they don't want to discuss. They don't want to touch this. This is what could make or break their political career. This is why we need to force them to push this referendum. This is why we must get the international community involved. This is why we must force the government to force this referendum, or else they won't. And you know, here's the scary thing. Of those two main parties I discussed about, 1 out of 44 Fianna Fáil TDs were pro-choice. 1/10 of the Fine Gael TDs were pro-choice. 16, however, of the 44 Fianna Fáil TDs were actually pro-life. So not only will our TDs and our members of Parliament not even discuss this issue, most of them are pro-life, and this is what's scary. We need to push them past their own beliefs. We must show them that not rocking the boat isn't an option anymore. We must force this to happen because it's just not happening in Ireland yet. So today, what I've spoken about is how democracy is not really working in Ireland, and it's not going to anytime soon. So this is the best way to force a referendum from happening. Number 2, how we're going to be called crazy feminists anyways, so we might as well embrace it and use it for our advantage, because it's going to happen anyways. Thirdly, that this has happened before and it's worked in Ireland, and that all these beautiful liberal traditions that we enjoy, non-gender discrimination, things like this, has happened because other women like Nell McCaffrey and all the other girls who went along with her were able to force it. That is why today I urge you to propose.
Just to announce the first pieces this evening, in a strange turn of events, both of them wish to speak on propositions. Since there's no one on opposition, we'll just let them go ahead. So the first people will be Sai, the second will be
We're good to go? So, some rebuttal for the Catherines. So Catherine Kelly argues that the whole kind of civil disobedience thing is like the volume of those who care, but I'd argue that it's not. It is actually the intimidation of those who don't care about the cause. So there's just kind of that slight clarification. Catherine Pacifica argues that the repeal movement is for people of all walks of life. This is not true. Maybe it is for all people in the walks of life in the liberal bubble, like kind of centralised in Dublin, which Sinead is talking about. But I'm from Sligo. If I went around town in my repeal jumper, boycotting the shops and like obstructing town hall, I would be absolutely shamed and ostracised by most of the people living in my community. Dublin is not representative of the entirety of Ireland. This we want repeal of the 8th in Ireland and not just Dublin. Like, we need to bear this in mind, and we need to kind of maintain this in our campaigning. So I'm going to begin my debate. I have 2 points for you here tonight. Firstly, no. The fundamental and indispensable importance of being sound, particularly in the face of highly emotive issues which we feel challenge freedom. And secondly, I'm going to talk about why this is a better approach to take to change in an Irish environment. Now, being sound may seem like a very nonchalant political stance to take when it comes to something like repealing the 8th Amendment, but I want you to hold on to your offence for just a minute and hear me out. Civil disobedience is often cited as being preferable to violence as it avoids direct harm. However, this does not take into account indirect harms which extend both to the society and to the groups who engage in civil disobedience. Firstly, I'll address the societal problems. So no matter how deeply we feel the righteousness of a cause, there is an arrogance which we cannot ignore to civil disobedience. The premise of civil disobedience is, no doubt, incredibly conscientious, but the reality of it is that we are basing our appeals for self-respect and moral consistency on the assumptions that what we perceive to be in the best interest of our society, not mine. I would argue that one movement cannot speak for the diversity of an entire nation of people, particularly within a democracy which values discourse as one of its core components. This is something we need to be aware of in our campaigns. To assume that what we perceive to be righteous and moral is absolute is an incredibly partial way to approach something which affects not just those you agree with, but also those who don't agree with you.
Specifically on that.
I'm okay for POIs, I have a lot to get through. So conceptions of rightness depend entirely on your perspective and your values. So ultimately advocating for all forms of civil disobedience to repeal the Eighth Amendment is a proposition which does not take into account the broad spectrum of opinions relating to the abortion question of Ireland. So this has been mentioned a lot in the debate before, but just to highlight this, you've got hardcore pro-lifers shouting abortion is murder from one end. A huge majority of Irish people, particularly rural Irish people, sitting ambiguously in the middle, twiddling their thumbs and looking kind of bemused at the whole thing. And the repeal movement taking up a sizable chunk of the other end of the spectrum, representing a variety of kind of dedication even when it's Islam. This is something that I found very kind of strange at the march, where you had people who were very kind of, battle-crying, heroic types, and then people like me who just feel like we're a bit intimidated by the whole eminence of it, but just kind of like to have access to abortion because that seems like something which would be nice to have around in the 21st century as a basic human right. So the last voice is like Rena was mentioning, are the moderate opposition. So these are not Bible thumpers. They're not often not conservative, but they're just people who don't think that abortion is okay. And civil disobedient movements make these voices even more silent. It makes them afraid to speak, and instead of respecting our differences, it attempts to eradicate their position and to systematically coerce them into agreement with ours. No. If not, they are left behind to work in the enterprises we are boycotting, to be owners of the buildings we are occupying, and to live in this country which has become unhospitable to them. If the only way to justify the disruption brought by civil disobedience is to say sod off to everyone who doesn't believe the same things as you do and forcibly reshape our shared society into something which accommodates only our beliefs, I believe that that's not sound. It's not a viable means by which to repeal the Eighth Amendment, as it is not democratic and is not something the majority of Irish people will consent to. And I think if we're going to have this referendum, we need to have Irish people consenting to the actions that we take to implement it. No, I'm okay, thanks. So, what is the solution? So I would argue that we need to take a more self-reflexive approach in order to repeal the Eighth. So the injustices done to our government, although they may seem to be arbitrary and authoritarian, are the legacy of a cultural attitude which we feel no longer represents many, but not all of Irish people. We would like to have rights to bodily autonomy, something more akin to our global neighbours, and feel it's the duty of our government to install these rights for citizens. There is a need for change, but we must recognise that the Irish state and our society is not anarchist or libertarian. Change is not something which is straightforward in Ireland, and although our analogous political system is undoubtedly ineffective, it is what it is, and it's not going to go anywhere. So we need to learn to work with it and not against it. I'm okay. We must remember that we're campaigning for access to abortion in Ireland and not forget the social and cultural environment to which we belong. We are not living in pre-revolutionary France. We are living in a moderated and differentiated society and must recognise that appealing to the government to change recognise that appealing to the government to change our abortion right carries with it an expectation that the government will maintain and protect these rights once they are instituted. I'm fine. There's a double standard here. It's both necessary to reject the current government laws and to recognise the unavoidable obstacle of our reliance on the state to implement this change. If we are to successfully implement the repeal of the Eighth Amendment, we must do so not by storming the Bastille and leaving Dáil Éireann with a grand-scale civil disobedience movement, which they are frankly ill-equipped to handle, but by engaging them in negotiation debate and by appealing to reason. I'm okay. So no one's arguing that there's an appalling backwardness to our constitution. I'm okay, which has not been addressed. Instead of rallying the troops, I am okay. Oh God. Instead of rallying the troops to take extreme action against the Irish state, I would advocate a careful approach which guarantees the sustainability of our rights and which respectfully acknowledges the different ethical metrics of different groups within Irish society and ensures that the freedom of no citizen is compromised, even those living in kind of rural Ireland, and backward waters like myself. So force, even non-violent force is not the solution to this problem. We find other ways of challenging the status quo which do not upset the equilibrium of Irish society or take for granted the diversity of opinion. In Ireland, the repeal of the Eighth Amendment will cause us to face a difficult challenge of stooping to moderation in order to speak the lingua franca of our country and our government. And I feel that the only way to do this is through referendum.
I think that respect is very key to this, and I don't feel like the majority of people in Ireland will consent to a movement which, kind of happens, like boycotts them, and oh God.
First speaker of the evening. So again, the floor speeches will be 4 minutes in length. And the middle 2 minutes will be open for points of information. So anyone in the audience can ask a question of our floor speakers after the first minute round. So our first floor speaker of the evening will be Sai.
Okay.
I don't think I'll be able to hear Sai's speech.
Oh, man makes fun of woman. Good call.
Look, I know not everyone's into strikes, and I learned this the hard way 2 weeks ago, so that's okay. Look, we're not asking that every woman goes out, or every person that supports the pro-choice movement goes out and stops paying their taxes and boycotts and strikes and protests. What we're saying is we're not going to abide by a state that doesn't represent people, that doesn't protect women, that is just blatantly ignored women for just way too long. Sinead gets up here and tells you oh, we do get media coverage and we do get people start talking about it, with the whole Savita thing. I really don't think that it's fair to talk about getting media coverage about the death of a woman. Beside the fact that the Irish maternity healthcare system needs a lot of funding and a lot of improvement, we also think that being told that the country was too Catholic to save her, we don't think that's adequate media coverage that's going to get any sort of highlighting on why women need abortion rights. So that's just ridiculous. Also, since when is the Irish Times a legitimate form of media? We're getting people talking about how the fact that the repeal movement are alienating women and the repeal movement are not adequately representing the women of Ireland are written by completely biased, most of the time fairly pro-life people who just shouldn't be writing about how people feel about the repeal. Oh, you missed my stuff about you, sorry. So we talk, sorry, that's really rude, sorry. Okay, so we talk about civil disobedience. We don't mean one strike per annum. We're talking about women and people going out repeatedly and disobeying people to the point that it's constant coverage of the fact that women are just not happy with how their uteruses, how their bodies are viewed by the government. We're talking about repeated coverage. We're talking about this being forced out into the public. We're not talking about people who aren't sure about how they feel being alienated, because what we think is when you have this level, the government has to deal with it. Media has to deal with it. Women will be invited. Women, when you, it was talked about the fact that there was international there's going to be international presence. If we think that when people like BBC cover the fact that women are going out and striking because we have no bodily autonomy, we think that this does force people to recognize their beliefs. We think what it does is challenges people as to why they believe that a fetus is a child, or why they think that past a certain stage a woman doesn't really know what sort of decisions she can make, what sort of decisions actually suit her. We think that this forces people to confront why they believe what they believe. And also when you look at this idea of civil disobedience, not every person is going to be civilly disobedient. No one's asking that. We're asking is that those who think that they that their idea of a legitimate form of protest is to stop abiding by a state that doesn't recognize their right to bodily autonomy. We think that's a legitimate thing. Billy comes up and talks about the Yes campaign and how
they went about it. We don't think the Yes campaign is comparable to like same-sex marriage, and like I don't appreciate like this idea that they're the same thing, because like fundamentally like this, like the Yes campaign like before that didn't see people die because they couldn't get married. This has seen women die and have to leave because the state just doesn't give a shit about them. We think that like where the state ignores them, ignores women, that like we don't care about alienating people, because whether you like it or not, like feminists are viewed as like, you know, feminazis, and like I think that doesn't really change. What does change is it highlights what people are willing to do to get some recognition of their opinion, to make a choice for them. We think that when you speak about abortion, this idea that aggressively pro-life, that was like Billy comes and talks about, we also think that people see like aggressively pro-choice. We also think that people aren't given like this opportunity to discuss why they're pro-life and like the extent to which they're pro-life. Also, I did not know we had a referendum coming up on that. They keep talking about us losing a referendum. We haven't been told we're having a referendum. We haven't been told to the extent we can repeal the Eighth Amendment. So we think that when you come up and tell me that I don't have a legitimate right to strike because of my lack of bodily autonomy, I think that you don't think that I know why I'm protesting. You don't think that I know the point to which I am pro-choice. And I don't think you are wanting to engage with me when you tell me that I can't stand up here and speak and say fuck the Eighth Amendment.
Thanks, for that speech, and I call for our final speaker of the evening, Eva.
Hi guys. So those that know me know I'm not a debater. I do not know how to debate, and I would say roughly 10% of what Jibangi said. I did not know the meaning of those words, but I got you. You were awesome. The one thing I do know is uteruses. Okay, to put some brackets on that. So I'm not a debater. The reason why I'm not a debater is because I'm studying midwifery and it's far too intense, and I've been studying midwifery for 3 years. In midwifery, they teach us how to take care of women who've had an abortion. And I have taken care of women who have had an abortion. I've had a woman come in who should have gotten an abortion because she knew her baby was going to die at 5 weeks. She wasn't allowed an abortion, and she couldn't afford to go to Manchester because she had 2 other kids. She had to carry that baby that knew it would only ever take maybe 1 breath up until 19 weeks. I stayed with her for 24 hours while she laboured. The dad was like bawling, crying, and she had the baby, and she didn't want to, she was too emotionally upset, so she said, take the baby away, take the baby away. I took the baby away. That baby did take a breath. I held that baby, or that fetus, in my arms, and it died in my arms. So I've dealt with this. And can I just say, the difference between the Yes campaign and the Repeal the Eighth campaign is the Yes campaign was all about love. I'm gay, like I was for that as well. But the Repeal the Eighth campaign is about anger. I'm angry that I had to do that, and I'm angry for that woman. And if I can do another story time, trying to like maintain confidentiality as well. So there was a 13-year-old girl who I was taking her booking history of. I noticed scars on her arms, and I brought her into a room and I said, what's going on? Her mum, who was very Catholic, was outside waiting for her. She confessed to me that her stepfather had been abusing her for 9 years. And that's how she's pregnant, and her mom has no idea, and her mom's really Catholic, and she looked at me and she said, what do people do in my situation? And if I had told her, like, go onto this website or go to Manchester, I would have gone to jail for 14 years. I'm angry, like, that's not fair that I can't just give basic advice to someone and I will literally go to jail for longer than somebody who raped someone would go to jail. I would go to jail for giving that girl advice longer than her horrible stepfather would have gone to jail if he had gotten caught. Last story time. So this, really I should not be saying, but we're all friends here. I had a friend who came to me that was in a sticky situation and asked my advice, and as I wasn't in the hospital and as it was my friend, I was like, I'm going to give her the advice. I don't care if I go to jail. I love her and I'm going to support her in this. So I gave her the advice that she needed. If I had gotten caught and if she had gotten caught, both of us would have gone to jail, and that's the difference. You need to, like, why do women scream? Why do women shout? It's because we're fucking angry at this. It's not fair, and it shouldn't be this way, and it's ridiculous in this day and age that I would go to jail longer than somebody that caused awful atrocities. Yes, that's all I have to say.
So in a few seconds, we're going to put the motion to the House, and all those that are in favour say aye, all those who are against say nay. So, on the motion that this House supports the use of all forms of civil disobedience in order to repeal the aid, all those in favour? Aye! All those against? Nay! Slightly biased, after hearing, I think the ayes have it. People stand up because it's kind of strange sitting down. A little bit emotional after story time. Who wouldn't be? There are actual real lived experiences of people. We can't refute or negate that. They've actually happened, and I'd like to congratulate you for sharing them with us. There's obviously so much that I want to say about this, but there's kind of very little that I actually need to say. Firstly, I want to say I'm supremely impressed by the standard of student oratory skills. I think it's something that you should really be proud of. I think having kind of debated a tiny bit but kind of unsuccessfully, it feels really nice to be invited back, but at this time for a different reason. I kind of come to this debate as someone who is described as an activist, and my project would be considered as apolitical and maybe a micro form of civil disobedience. But in my professional life, I work inside of Leinster House, so I'm considered as someone who might be very conventional and doing things by the book. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk a tiny bit about, is that civil disobedience works in tandem with governmental change, that they're not things that are polar opposites, they're not things that are completely and utterly dichotomies of one another. I thought it was kind of, I'm a little bit sick, but I'm going to keep going. I thought it was a little bit ironic that, I was coming to speak at a women's competition final when the only reason that women were allowed to speak in the HIS is through forms of unparliamentary, probably unnecessary disobedience, that at the time when it was seen as the last masculine stronghold of Trinity College, the last place where women were allowed to come inside and stand up and talk about their opinions, that it was one woman who decided to dress up as a man with 8 other women and storm a debate. Now maybe at that time, in that situation, we would have thought that that was morally abhorrent. We must have thought, or we could have thought, that it was so unnecessary, and we would have disenfranchised ourselves from those women. But do we now stand in support of Rosary Lavery for dressing up as a man? Of course we do, because in the end she got us to where we wanted to go. So I want to, oh my gosh, my voice it's really going. I'm going to steal your water. I'll take this one.
To be clear, that's her water, not just Paul's.
So it's all of our water. It's all of our water. So yeah, what I want to say is this debate, this topic, this issue, this human rights travesty that Ireland is like a chasm. It is completely different to the rest of the world. It is so much bigger than this room. It is so much bigger than any conversation that we're going to have. And the greatest thing is it is an absolute inevitability, it's an absolute certainty that it is going to pass. It's just a matter of time. And I do get a little bit kind of confused, even though I know most of the girls who I talked to earlier are actually pro-repeal, when you say that you see anger. I was stating earlier that I would never wish harm upon anyone that is anti-choice, and that is actually the opinion of lots of anti-choice campaigners. And what we were doing is, whilst we were striking and trying to call it a referendum campaign is an extremely well thought out, kind, compassionate, knocking on people's doors and having conversations with people who don't share the kind of same opinion as I would. What I would also say is, it's really going. Maybe if I talk Can you hear me? If I talk slightly less loud. I just wanted to say, like, Martin Luther kind of like said about like paternalistically kind of telling a Negro to wait for like a more convenient season is just a way to maintain and to prolong like systems of slavery. And it's the same as this. How can you expect women not to be angry when this is like a century-old fight? It's like that Aesop's Fables thing of like slow and steady wins the race. Is that necessarily true when we have waited so long, when people have actually died because of this? Like when people tonight are being affected by the journey they're going to make tomorrow. So what I would say is maybe you mightn't strike, but it is to support your sisters who are ultimately trying to kind of, you know, succeed in fighting for your liberation. Yeah, I would just say that. Gosh, the voice is like really, really going. And I was going to say as well, like in terms of like activism is like apolitical. It's like anti-dominant hegemony. It's trying to like topple the kind of current dominant narrative that doesn't necessarily speak to you. What I would say is you're trying to create a new alternative that then will actually be inside the structures, that will actually work inside government. So what I would say is when you look at strikes, try and understand that the results that strikes are trying to bring about is to bring about a new narrative inside the kind of old structures. So you should try and welcome them more warmly. And then just, I heard like alienation and like angry being kind of talked about a lot, but like really like no alienation or no on the street shouting will ever shadow the alienation that women that will never be able to speak out about this have been made feel. It's absolutely like so awful. And then just about the media, like our state broadcaster, our broadcaster is owned by the state, which is intrinsically linked by the constitution, by the church. So there's always going to be a massive gap. So you have to make alternatives. And that was like, for me with the repeal jumpers, as someone who probably will get into conventional politics, I had to create an alternative, and it was just the most easy thing for me to do. And someone mentioned Sligo. Like Sligo Abortion Rights Campaign is actually the most active abortion rights campaign outside of Dublin. So really sometimes, and it's true, because like we are all very privileged, we're in this kind of like middle class liberal echo chamber, but like do actually look outside of like where you're currently in, because you'll be surprised about some of the groundworks that has been put in place. And then, yeah, I was just really impressed. I think you're all like really intellectual. I think you're very fluent in your oratorial skills. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It was like a real privilege. I didn't actually graduate from Trinity. I kind of like ran away before I finished my degree, but I had such an amazing time inside the GMB, and like even like looking at some of the past auditors and some of the current like vice presidents and people within the HIST, I would just say that like continue to like use your voice and to continue practicing. It's essentially like a sport. You just learn and you get way better. I used to be so painfully shy. I remember doing a competitive debate, and it was actually on like Israel and Palestine, something I'd read on so much, and I got so nervous. I had nothing to say. So to anyone that has never debated before, I would just say like definitely give it a go. And you have no idea like how powerful just one debate or one conversation can be so transformative. Repeal the age drop was 10. I'm now going to call on the wonderful auditor to announce the Society's forthcoming events.
First, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to congratulate all the speakers, and I'd like to thank especially Anna for chairing the debate. So our debate next Wednesday is the final debate of the year. And it is the age-old question that has dogged the HIST for years, which is, this house supports socialism. So next Wednesday to find out if the HIST really has
Taxation is
been taken over by the right, as many claim, or whether we're still a bastion of the left. Also, next Monday evening, we have the final of the Wolf Tone debate competition, another internal competition that we've been running over the past few weeks. The speakers who will be speaking at that final will be announced over the coming days, and I encourage you all to come along to that and support those speakers. The next thing then, as you'll probably be aware because I announced it in private business, but nominations are open for next year's committee. I'd really encourage you all to go have a read through the posts about it on Facebook and the stuff that will be in the weekly email, and have a think about running for next year's committee. I've certainly enjoyed the 3 years that I've been in committee of the HIS. It's been great, and I'd encourage you all to do it. Yeah, other than that then, I'd just like to remind you all of the RIT returns and encourage you to fill them out as we use them for prizes at the end of the year. And we have a reception upstairs in the conversation room, which I'd encourage you all to come up to, and we'll be going to Cafe on the Sound.